Hello, welcome or welcome back. I'd like to start today by saying I think this is the first video that I've set out to record for this channel that before I even thought of what the course of it might be, I already knew how it would both begin and end. So I'm going to begin with a quote from Debord, who wrote, "Perfected denial of man has taken charge of the totality of human existence." All right, so that's where we're starting. And I was thinking about this in terms from an Emersonian perspective. By that I mean Ralph Waldo Emerson in his essay Self-Reliance, because there's both the theme and the subtext that I'm working with here. So this is an excerpt from Self-Reliance. And Emerson writes, "Every man discriminates between the voluntary acts of his mind and his involuntary perceptions, and knows that to his involuntary perceptions a perfect faith is due. He may err in the expression of them, but he knows that these things are so, like day and night, not to be disputed. My willful actions and acquisitions are but roving, the idlest reverie, the faintest native emotion command my curiosity and respect." He's saying that what arises in him is worthy of attention and respect. Thoughtless people contradict as readily the statement of perceptions as of opinions, or rather much more readily, for they do not distinguish between perception and notion. They fancy that I choose to see this or that thing. Maybe it was revealed to him and he didn't have a choice. But perception is not whimsical, but fatal. If I see a trait, my children will see it after me, and in course of time, all mankind, although it may chance that no one has seen it before me, for my perception of it is as much of a fact as the sun. So think of any discovery, whether seen as hard science or now native or common in human perception and thought. Before anyone and everyone knew it, someone had to first see it. It had to first be revealed. And then so much of human history is, well, how is it for thousands of years, year after year, tens of thousands of years down to millennia here, in recent, the recent burgeoning of civilization, it's like year after year, how many things were unseen until today we see that more things are seen than ever before, right? And this takes us to Guy Debord's Society of the Spectacle, which is where that first quotation came from. Perfected denial of man has taken charge of the totality of human existence, right? So Emerson says, if I see something, I might be the first one to see it. My children will see it after me, but we're seeing it, and eventually everyone might come to see it so, right? But what if what you're seeing is so challenging or such an affront to whether it's perception or notion that it can't actually be seen, it can't actually be tolerated, it can't actually be witnessed and carried and dealt with? Or it's kind of following Nietzsche's notion of truth, that what if it turns out truth is the most harmful thing to life? It's a serious question. What would be the point of it? When you see that all animals can exist without knowing truth or even arguing truth, right? Even humans didn't have to know anything to live, to evolve, but now everyone knows everything, right? In a certain sense. So this takes us to where I wanted to go next, which was, okay, so what if you're the first one to see a trait? How do you then present it? So in Nietzsche's Thus Spake Zarathustra, Zarathustra the prophet, right? The man free of contempt, the man who gets sick to get over himself, to go beyond himself, because that's his fatal nature, right? It's wholly unavoidable. What was revealed to him was revealed to him, and then he in turn, from the previous perspective, shows it to us. And what Nietzsche is saying here he presents his highest teaching, which actually follows from Goethe's Faust, if I'm not mistaken, thanks to my friend who gave me the source, where he coins the term superhuman, right? The person who looks inside to create themselves rather than in an extroverted and sensational world in a spectacally driven world, right? That cannot see inward, who can only ascertain outwards and project and transfer feelings of power and well-being and happiness as pertains to what is seen outside, right? So he tries teaching them, essentially Goethe's Superman, but he owns it as his, right? And in the same sense, he's showing you where he took his name from, right? Zarathustra says, I took my name from those who know truth was hard to handle, like bow and arrow in a certain sense, right? To master these things is difficult, but provides the ultimate advantage in war, right? And that it's funny for using and I guess maybe this is him preserving what he thought was worth preserving from his culture, because he otherwise speaks of German thinkers as being unable to think, whereas he sees Goethe as a higher type. And Nietzsche's criticism of everyone from Hegel to Kant is that they're idiots who don't know how to think. I mean, this is just in a nutshell. But he's saying that these guys are trying to have their cake and eat it too, right? This was decadent society, I guess you could say, was wanting the illusion to be reality, wanting the ideal to be reality, rather than realizing it was the bow that was shot before we even came into existence. Before anyone came to know about it, there was already something from the future set in the past pulling us forward, and it's ceaseless, and time doesn't stop for anybody. So in Zarathustra's case, he comes down from the mountain and realizes, am I on time? Am I speaking to the right people? Are these even my people? He's questioning the situation because they don't understand him at all. So he goes on to say, well, if you can't relate to a higher teaching, if you can't see the future, if you can't understand where we've been, where we're going, and where we're at, how can I then relate something you can form a bridge to, something you can relate to? So he goes on, after he tries teaching them the Superman, he says, when Zarathustra had spoken these words, he again looked at the people and was silent. There they stand, said he to his heart. There they laugh. They understand me not. I am not the mouth for these ears. And worth mentioning, talking about Society of the Spectacle, he met them at the fairground. He met them in the middle of the market, in the middle of the spectacle. Remember, the spectacle where everything is bought and known, the spectacle where everything is bought and sold, that they already know what's what. So he goes on, must one first batter their ears that they may learn to hear with their eyes? Interesting way of speaking, right? Nietzsche's a philosopher of tones, and tones relate to feelings, sounds, and color. So, and more than that too, music obviously and rhythm, but must one clatter like kettle drums and penitential preachers, right? So he's saying, do I have to treat them like the moralists of old? Do I have to threaten them with hell? Do I have to tell them how much I hate them subversively? And he goes on, or do they only believe the stammerer, right? And Zarathustra is a stammerer. They have something whereupon they are proud. So this is where Nietzsche's making the connection of what these people are identifying with. What do they call it? That which maketh them proud. Culture, they call it. It distinguishes them from the goat herds. And in modern times, you could say, oh, these modern people are proud. They have not even culture, they have science, they have spectacle, they have rigid rules. Because what Emerson says in Self-Reliance is that people hate it, that being is becoming. Because the whole past hates it, that beings become, because the past is about setting things in stasis. Hey, we already figured this out. Stop going so far. You guys went overboard already, right? You got heavy and it started raining or something. Anyway, so he's recognizing that there's a big divide. So again, modern terms would be something like these cultured people, these knowledgeable people, these educated people, they think that their culture and their knowledge differentiates them from the lower middle class, or the homeless, right? Because to be homeless is to be a non-entity rather than homeless being essentially the animal condition, that every animal is homeless but then makes a home here, except for humans who aren't allowed to make a home anywhere. And this gets into Zap's territory in The Last Messiah, which I covered in the last videos if you want to go check those out, but I'm going to keep going here. So they dislike, therefore, to hear of contempt of themselves, right? This is kind of the most disgusting thing, right? That so many people are so self-satisfied. Why would you change anything, right? So I will appeal to their pride. So he recognizes if they can't recognize a being above them, let me give them a being below them to relate to. And this is no different, actually, paralleled in Goethe's Superhuman and Superman, when he mentions at the end of the stanza, if I recall correctly, the writhing worm. So the writhing worm in this case goes on, I will speak to them of the most contemptible thing. That, however, is the last man. And thus spake Zarathustra unto the people. It is time for man to fix his goal. It is time for man to plant the germ of his highest hope. Still is his soil rich enough for it, but that soil will one day be poor and exhausted, and no lofty tree will any longer be able to grow thereon. Excuse me. Alas, there cometh the time when man will no longer launch the arrow of his longing beyond man, and the string of his bow will have unlearned to whiz. I tell you, one must still have chaos in one to give birth to a dancing star. I tell you, ye still have chaos in you. Alas, there cometh the time when man will no longer give birth to any star. Alas, there cometh the time of the most despicable man, who can no longer despise himself. Lo, I show you the last man. What is love? What is creation? What is longing? What is a star? So asketh the last man, and blinketh. The earth hath become smaller, and on it there hoppeth the last man, who maketh everything small. His species is ineradicable like that of the ground flea. The last man liveth longest, right? Instead of wisdom and understanding, he just has naming and knowing. He has, and he mistakes that for profundity, right? It really is shallow. So, and it's not even happy and shallow. We have discovered happiness, say the last men, and blink thereby. They have left the regions where it is hard to live, for they need warmth. One still loveth one's neighbor, and rubbeth against them, for one needeth warmth. Turning ill and being distrustful, they consider sinful. They walk warily. He is a fool who still stumbleth over men's stones or men. Right? So again, he's saying, everything's already known, everything's figured out, we know what we are, we know where we're going. Why would you bother? Why would you, back to Zaph, why bother to think? It's too much trouble. A little poison now and then that maketh pleasant dreams, and much poison at last for a pleasant death. One still worketh, for work is a pastime, but one is careful lest the pastime should hurt one. One no longer becometh poor or rich, both are too burdensome. Who still wanteth the rule? Who still wanteth to obey? Both are too burdensome. And this is the society of the spectacle, where I mentioned in a Jean Baudrillard-esque fashion, power just infinitely recedes into itself, into its own unreality, which we're going to get to shortly. No shepherd and one herd, not even, right? No shepherd and one herd, just invisible authority everywhere, cameras and recordings and images of men, but where are the men, right? No shepherd and one herd, everyone wanteth the same, everyone is equal. He who hath other sentiments goeth voluntary to the madhouse. That's hilarious. Just the other day I wrote, insanity, it's just having thoughts and beliefs that aren't shared by or recognized by others. But back to Emerson, what if you're the first one to see the traits? Well, welcome to the madhouse. In case you didn't notice, if a few you comb your hair right, you'll blend right in with the rest of them, I guess is a way to put it. So formerly all the world was insane, say the subtlest of them, and blink thereby, right? The idea that the people in the past didn't know what they were doing, the people who brought us here that these other people couldn't even compare to, who these other people don't even actually understand. Humanity's greatest minds to this day, still not understood or ranked or discussed in any sense of cultural pride or understanding that, is kind of on the philosopher's side of things. So they're clever and know all that has happened. They are clever and know all that has happened. So there is no end to their raillery. People still fall out, but are soon reconciled. Otherwise, it spoileth their stomachs. So he's saying they don't have stomachs for conflict, for disagreement. It's just a human abyss, right? Because the thoughts never match the feelings. The thoughts, the actions, the feelings, and the desired values and the desired life never match the reality. Welcome to the human abyss. They have their little pleasures for the day and their little pleasures for the night, but they have a regard for health. The last man liveth longest, right? Why? No purpose, no point, no idea, no clue as to what's going to happen in the future, because they don't know what happened in the present. They don't know what's happened in the past, but they think they know everything, right? So they've discovered happiness. And here ended the first discourse of Zarathustra, which goes from, his prologue, which is also called the prologue. For this point, the shouting and mirth of the multitude interrupted him. Give us this last man, O Zarathustra, they called out. And this is the irony and the tragedy of it, right? That they see no connection to either of it. They see no connection to the past or the future. They're just an all-knowing, ever-present, ever-existing present moment, because all of culture has been about wrapping the world in stasis and putting a cap on being and becoming and say, thus you will be no more, because we can't have humanity making history. There's too many people for humanity to make history. It needs to be utterly pacified, right? So welcome to the age of the last man. That trait that was seen and named over 100 years ago and now is well known, at least in circles of knowing. Outside those circles, just the knowledge and the truth have no place, right? That's kind of like pay grade and MO, or place in society even, these interlocking rings of people who do and don't meet and who definitely don't understand each other, because it seems like personality, the essence of personality, thinking, feeling, knowing, all these elements that make up an individual and different types of individuals, that it wasn't given to all of us to really understand or know each other, or more relevant, to care to know, to understand each other. So, this ends the prologue, and, what you can see here is that the crowd who had gathered for the spectacle of the tightrope walker and the jester and then the mad prophet who walked along, they screamed to him, give us this last man, just make us into him. Part of Zarathustra, there's not just a parallel, but a replacement of the New Testament. So as a free-form literary analysis, you could interpret this as no different than the crowd in Jesus's time, right? The misunderstanding that they'll say, give us the common criminal, give us the vagabond, give us the whatever before you give us the genius, right? Give us the last man before you give us the Superman. Give us Barabbas before you give us the king, or now who the Christians see as God of the entire cosmos, right? Or the universe. So it's very profound, and it's actually a tragedy. And in Christianity, it became a comedy because of the resurrection, right? Because everyone gets to live forever. It's okay that that Leviathan swallows the earth and wraps the planet in non-being and passivity, which is what we're about to get to with the spectacle, or what I'd like to call maybe Leviathanism, in terms of the corporation state and how it owns the planet and the people. Or at least it thinks it does. The people therein think they do, which is pretty hubristic and insane. Like, okay, don't worry, that's never stopped history from happening in any time in the past. But that also means we're headed for choppy waters. So I do want to be clear about that. But Zarathustra does make the point. They understand me not. I'm not the mouth for these ears. Too long, perhaps, have I lived in the mountains. He's saying, too long have I lived apart. Too long have I lived at peace. Too much have I hearkened into the brooks and trees. Now do I speak unto them as unto goat herds. So calm is my soul. So that's a subtle insult. Calm is my soul and clear like the mountains in the morning, but they think me cold and a mocker with terrible jests, right? They're just meeting what they see as cynicism with cynicism because they're not seeing what he's saying. Hence he asks, you know, must one batter their ears that they may learn to hear with their eyes, right? Seeing is believing. And it doesn't matter. You could sit there standing on your own rainbow bridge, and the hunchback and the cripples will still say, prove it. Show yourself to us. In the past, it was demanding miracles. The last man doesn't believe in anything. He's a covert nihilist because he already knows everything and he's lost the will to fight, to live, to war with himself, with others, right? He lacks that contempt of himself to despise himself, which is to challenge himself to go beyond, to realize the worm within and thus aspire to something more than human, right? Because we've been doing this civilization game for thousands of years. We already know what people like and what people don't like. The spectacle is another matter, though, but it also tells you what is. So this is Guy Debord's The Society of the Spectacle. And so everyone knows, again, I don't consider myself of the Frankfurt School or a Marxist, but where they're right, they're right. And that's the same idea that it doesn't matter. A philosopher is a type, and a philosopher sees what they see and reports on it, regardless of whether other people like it or not. It doesn't mean, maybe they're like a clock and they're only right twice a day. But what does a clock even mean in a world that doesn't need God anymore, or a world where God died, and yet we still have calendars that line up with God's birth? It doesn't even make sense. Might as well be a new year. It might as well be year zero again, if you understand what I'm saying. So, chapter 1 is separation perfected. He begins with a quote from Feuerbach. And Feuerbach writes, "But for the present age, which prefers the sign to the thing signified, the copy to the original, representation to reality, appearance to essence, truth is considered profane, and only illusion is sacred. Sacredness is in fact held to be enhanced in proportion as truth decreases and illusion increases, so that the highest degree of illusion comes to be seen as the highest degree of sacredness." So that's Feuerbach, preface to the second edition of The Essence of Christianity. And if I'm not mistaken, that was from the 19th century, right? And you can almost see it's like a 19th century Jean Baudrillard. Again, that idea of from that backwards position, you can already look to the future. In 1841, I think is when he published it. It's not dated here, where he's looking to the future and he's already seeing the horizon of the encroaching hyper reality, which is what he begins, which is what the Society of the Spectacle basically gets into. So chapter 1, in societies where modern conditions of production prevail, life is presented as an immense accumulation of spectacles, and its premise is hoarding. Everything that was directly lived has receded into a representation. What was once ways of life and meaningful connections and relations to environment, product, producer is now just a big mess, a big symbolic fever dream, right? The sky is you go to any city and the sky is always the same. It's the gray color of a dead TV station. If you guys remember what TV was. Aphorism 2 here. The images detached from every aspect of life merge into a common stream, there you go, a common stream in which the unity of that life can no longer be recovered. Fragmented views of reality regroup themselves into a new unity as a separate pseudo-world. That can only be looked at. The specialization of images of the world has culminated in a world of autonomized images where even the deceivers are deceived. The spectacle is a concrete inversion of life, an autonomous movement of the non-living. So basically, now that we understand the human mind works by way of repression, and that the average human ego is so fragile as to not be able to handle anything resembling reality, right? Needs sugar for the poison to go down, for the medicine to go down. We can begin to see a certain picture, right? That even the deceivers must deceive themselves. 3. The spectacle presents itself simultaneously as society itself, as part of society, and as a means of unification. As a part of society, it is ostensibly the focal point of all vision and all consciousnness. But due to the very fact that this sector is separate, it is in reality the domain of delusion that false consciousness, to me this is where it gets metaphysical, right? Instead of having original sin and needing to be cleansed through Christianity, now your false consciousness needs to be fixed by Marxism's mirror and psychoanalysis. You see the shell game being played here? Right? This is always the case because, again, it's always sign and signified. Where are we ever pointing at anything and any single person agreeing, oh yes, this is reality. It's a river. It's flux. By the time you've ascertained the trait, it's already well on its way to being seen by everyone else or a few others. The spectacle is a concrete inversion of life, an autonomous movement of the non-living. And if you think of autonomous, it's like the autonomous nervous system. It works on its own accord. You don't have to teach it. You don't have to condition it. It was already working before anyone was born. You get it? Does that make sense? I hope it does. 3. The spectacle presents itself simultaneously as society itself, as part of society. And this is where I was at. My bad, but I'll leave the last part in for the commentary. As a part of society, it is ostensibly the focal point of all vision and all consciousness. But due to the very fact, right, everyone's worried about their position and their reputation therein. But due to the very fact that this sector is separate, is in reality the domain of delusion and false consciousness, right? That's where I went off on the tangent. The unification it achieves is nothing but an official language of universal separation. And then more words don't bridge that divide. See, back to my note, and then I'll say this in reference to what I said earlier, the idea that naming is the same as knowing, no. Or that reading is the same as knowing, no, it's not. Or that speaking is the same as wisdom, no. The spectacle is not a collection of images. It is a social relation between people that is mediated by images. 5. The spectacle cannot be understood as mere visual excess produced by mass media technologies. It is a worldwide that has actually been materialized, that has become an objective reality. As I said, Leviathanism. And, well, remember, Leviathan comes from the Old Testament, not just Hobbes. 6. Understood in its totality, the spectacle is both the result that the project of the present mode of production. The spectacle is both the result and the project of the present mode of production. It's like working on working. It is not a mere supplement of decoration added to the real world. It is the heart of the real society's unreality, right? Pretend to work and the society will pretend to go somewhere. Like there's some rewarded state that we're going to get to, whether it's false consciousness or the immortal soul, right? The reward comes in a later time. But it's enough to distract everyone's surfeit of destructive consciousness. Whether that's, well, in theory, if it's conscious, then it can be divested from. So it's at the heart of society's unreality and all of its particular manifestation, news, propaganda, advertising, entertainment, arguably all the same thing in one. The spectacle is the model of the prevailing way of life. It is the omnipresent affirmation of the choices that have already been made, right? It's like patting yourself on the back for something your ancestors did. It's absurd, right? And this is why it's contemptible. In the sphere of production, both of the conditions and goals of the existing system. So the aim is the aim. What aim? Exactly. Just shut up and work. Stop asking questions. The spectacle is also the constant presence of this justification, since it monopolizes the majority of the time spent outside the modern production process, meaning you can never escape it. All roads lead back to Rome. All roads lead to the spectacle. All roads lead to bread and circus, really. 7. Separation is itself an integral part of the unity of this world, of a global social praxis split into the reality and image. The social practice confronted by an autonomous spectacle is at the same time the real totality which contains that spectacle, but the split within this totality mutilates it to the point that the spectacle seems to be its goal. The language of the spectacle consists of signs of the dominant system of production, signs which are at the same time the ultimate end products of that system. Setting aside real quick Neo-Romanticism, Neoplatonism, or General Platonism in Christianity of German Enlightenment thinkers, or whatever these made-up terms are for these few people who existed at various times and places who created a body of works largely independent, or like kind of, it was never independent. It was more like in these relations he's discussing, right? The spectacle cannot be abstractly contrasted to concrete social activity. Each side of such a duality is itself divided. The war of all against all is where that fits into this Leviathanism. The spectacle that falsifies reality is nevertheless a real product of the reality. Oh, this is exactly what I was about to say earlier. So now I can finish the thought. Even though there's been all this talk recently in the last naive decade of, right, because we're talking about hundreds of years of developing bodies of works here, ladies and gentlemen, there's been this notion of fake news, alternative facts. Ladies and gentlemen, everything you see in the news is to say, hey, see this thing we're voluntarily showing you? We're showing it to you to get rid of it. We're showing it to you for you to not see it. Everything in the news is to not be news. Now that you know it, you can set it aside or throw it away, because you know that you were being manipulated from the go anyway, right? That's how clever everyone is, yet it all works day by day, at least has so far. So, product of that reality, while lived reality is materially invaded by the contemplation of the spectacle and ends up absorbing it and aligning itself with it. It's all encompassing, no escape. Objective reality is present on both sides. Each of these seemingly fixed concepts has no other basis than its transformation into its opposite, right? It's like in the battle of good and evil, there is no middle ground or third, fourth, fifth, sixth side perspective or other people. It's just good and evil, and the entire world is seen to fit into opposites. Why? To quote Nietzsche, opposites suit a plebeian age, right? The last man thinks in labels, and labels are matters of opposites. So reality emerges within the spectacle, and the spectacle is real. This reciprocal alienation is the essence and support of the existing society. Okay, and this is where I'll point out again, the Marxists are wrong. Nietzsche was right. The last man is all too comfortable. He's comfortable, all too comfortable. He's complacent, all too complacent, right? This is why that working class revolution never came. Never mind that the midwits threw out the lowwits, right? That usually in the past, the midwits used them as the cannon fodder. But I think the spectacle is already kind of running the show automatically, which is kind of what Guy Debord is largely asserting, right? Everything gets sucked up into this orgy of sights, sounds, and destruction, consumption, production of non-production. 9. In a world that has really been turned upside down, the true is a moment of the false. Disillusionment. Samsara. The sum of disillusionment is samsara. 10. The concept of the spectacle interrelates and explains a wide range of seemingly unconnected phenomena. The apparent diversities and contrasts of these phenomena stem from the social organizations of appearances, whose essential nature must itself be recognized. Consider in its own terms, the spectacle is an affirmation of appearances and identification of all human social life with appearances. But a critique that grasps the spectacle's essential character reveals it to be visible negation of life. It's nihilistic. It has no goal. A negation that has taken on a visible form. So it's nihilism instantiated into civilization. It's a iron slave collar that says just wait here for the end. because the end isn't coming, because we have it locked up tight. Everything's known, everything's understood, and the rest is planned and managed for. We don't have rulers, we don't have men, we have bureaucrats. We have Kafka's Metamorphosis. We have Orwell's nameless, faceless bugmen just inhabiting the system from top to bottom. The worm churns, the worms writhe, right? 11. In order to describe the spectacle, its information, its functions, or its formation, its functions, and the forces that work against it, it is necessary to make some artificial distinctions. In analyzing the spectacle, we are obliged to a certain extent to use the spectacle's own language, in the sense that we have to operate on the methodological terrain of the society that expresses itself in the spectacle, right? So unless you're recognizing God, he can't recognize you. Unless you're playing praise to your culture, they're going to say, no, that's insanity, to the madhouse with you, right? You either speak our language, you play our game, or to the madhouse with you. 12. The spectacle presents itself as a vast, inaccessible reality that can never be questioned. Its sole message is what appears as good. What is good appears, right? And it's about as moronic as saying, well, because it worked, it's successful, and because it works, it's always going to be successful. I'll take us back to Seneca again. We follow fashion, not reason. So what appears as good, what is good appears, right? It really begins to tell you that the human psyche is quite juvenile, right? That the rings of culture really are a playground for the psychologically undeveloped to live and die a whole life. See, once upon a time, people only lived so long. You didn't need to sit there psyoping a person to believe that, let's see, how does it go? Whatever appears as good and whatever is good appears. You didn't have to psyop them into that for 75 to 100 years at a time, right? They would die. The passive acceptance it demands is already effectively imposed by its monopoly of appearances, its manner of appearing without allowing any reply. This is Leviathanism. This is the corporation state. This is the new idol, or that thousand-scaled glittering dragon of lies saying there are no new values, there can be no created values, right? It's a refutation of it's a symbolic refutation of the self-generative soul, of the superhuman, of the man who goes to try to make something more of himself than just another ape after a whole history of them. 12. The spectacle presents itself as a vast, inaccessible reality that can never be questioned. Its sole message is 13. The tautological character of the spectacle stems from the fact that its means and ends are identical. It is the sun that never sets over the empire of modern passivity and schizoid decay, I'll add. It covers the entire surface of the globe, endlessly basking in its own glory, right? And so long as you mouth the words, you can get in on it too, right? 14. The society based on modern industry is not accidentally or superficially spectacular. It is fundamentally spectacleist, right? It's meant for everyone to be in the audience watching itself watch itself. In the spectacle, the visual reflection of the ruling economic order, goals are nothing, development is everything. The spectacle aims at nothing other than itself, right? No past, no future, permanent stasis. 15. As indispensable embellishment of currently produced objects, as general articulation of the system's rationales, and as advanced economic sector that directly creates an ever-increasing multitude of image objects, the spectacle is the leading production of present-day society. And social media would indicate this to be true. As I talked about with McLuhan and McKenna, they understood it to be psychoanalysis in reverse, or this is kind of what like the Frankfurt School and the postmodernists got to. So if you can understand what psychoanalysis in reverse is, that is the user becoming the content, the media, the spectacle telling the user, thou art, right? You can reverse engineer your way backward in that thought process to see how hubristic, psychopathic, and in denial of reality it is. It must be founded on the hatred of being and becoming, meaning people are afraid everywhere you go, from the top to the bottom of society. It's all held together by fear, not love, not organic eros, not the what I've heard even governmental people call a certain social spirit of happiness, which assumes that there's some sort of right relation, some sort of right association, or mutually desirable and beneficial, or voluntary or self-generated network. But I'm going to keep going here. The spectacle is the leading production of the present-day society. 16. The spectacle is able to subject human beings to itself because the economy has already totally subjugated them. It is nothing other than the economy developing for itself. It is at once a faithful reflection of the production of the things and a distorting objectification of the producers, which reminds me of what I was trying to finish earlier as well, is to say, though, in this reflection, right, in this already happened subjugation, this passivity, this already happened, this rendering of being into nothingness or being into thingness, going from being to having to the illusion of having. '17. Let's keep moving because I missed it again. Nothing other than the economy developing for itself, right? That's the stasis. That's the thing that says no more being, no more becoming. Basically, if you kind of look at bureaucracy, modern paperwork, modern contracts, it's all a cobweb. I can't even call it a spider web, because a spider web has living beings in it. A cobweb is a dead home. A cobweb is a dead environment. I guess this is McLuhan saying an apartment becomes a catacomb. The first stage of the economy's domination of social life brought about an evident degradation of being into having. Human fulfillment was no longer equated with what one was, but with what one possessed. The present stage, right, it's hoarding. It's a mental disorder. The present stage, in which social life has become completely occupied by the accumulated productions of the economy, is bringing about a general shift from having to appearing. So now it's, oh shit, that means it's not even a mental disorder. It's a mental disorder from a mental disorder. As all having must now derive as its immediate prestige and its ultimate purpose from appearances, right? Because there's no being and becoming. It just means there's agreed upon objects, and those objects have a value or they don't. So all individual reality has become social. Oh, I'm getting ahead of ourselves. The present stage, in which social life has become completely occupied by the accumulated production of the economy, is bringing about a general shift from having to appearing. All having must now derive its immediate prestige and its ultimate purpose from appearances. At the same time, all individual reality has become social, in the sense that it is shaped by social forces and is directly dependent on them, right? You can't exist unless they allow you to. There's this line in Zarathustra where Nietzsche writes, "For these reasons, you are forgiven for living, but you better believe you're expected to work off the debt." What debt? The debt of the spectacle. It's the most costly thing humanity has ever done. So, this is where it gets real, and by real, I mean strange. At the same time, all individual reality has become social in the sense that it is shaped by social forces and is directly dependent on them. Individual reality is allowed to appear only insofar as it is not actually real, right? Otherwise, it's one shepherd or one herd, no shepherd. If you really think differently, into the madhouse. And I know you can say the spectacle derives itself sub-niches and sub-markets, but it only further proves Debord's points, and Baudrillard and other post-structuralists and postmodernists and other terminologies that I just think are fundamentally dead as God even. 18. When the real world is transformed into mere images become real beings, figments that provide the direct motivations for a hypnotic behavior. Since the spectacle's job is to use various specialized mediations in order to show us a world that can no longer be directly grasped or seen, right, as Emerson kind of said, right? What about when you can see no, yeah, right, I'm posing a new question here. What if nobody can see traits any longer, right? Or what if everyone knows the traits? It naturally elevates the sense of sight to the special preeminence once occupied by touch. The most abstract and easily deceived sense is the most readily adaptable to the generalized abstraction of present-day society. As arguably, that's the notion of reason and rationale itself, or conversely, religion. It all serves a spectacle anyway. But the spectacle is not merely a matter of images, nor even of images plus sounds. It is whatever escapes people's activity, whatever eludes their practical reconsideration and correction. So everything you can't see is appearing before us. Everything we can't see is appearing before us. It appears in the spectacle, so it can't be seen. It's not supposed to be seen. It's meant to be dismissed. It is the opposite of dialogue. It's dialogue to hide something, right? Which is weird. Why would you use words to hide something? Because the hiding is the revealing? Not quite. Wherever representation becomes independent, the spectacle regenerates itself, right? That was like me saying submarkets, sub-niches, even boutique culture, to, that you have to, for something to exist, it needs support. Without support, it can't exist in the world. It just doesn't. An individual being in the animal kingdom, either if it's a social animal, then it has its naturally occurring social pack. If it's a singular solo animal, like a worm or a snow leopard, then it evolved to survive on its own. This was a artificially asserted stasis on reality and history, that it can't happen anymore, right? This is me bringing up McLuhan and McKenna earlier, that the psychoanalysis in reverse is to uncreate the human being. If all history was creating the identity and the pride and the culture and the identity that was worth fighting over, right? Because I mentioned this goes back to will and vitality and the desire to live and to not live as a thrall or as a mere tool for someone or something else, or like Dr. Eric Fromm says, that like even the most kind of docile and quaint human, in some sense, knows enough that they don't want to feel like they're just dice thrown out of a cup. They don't want to be robbed of their dignity. They don't want to be destroyed and humiliated. But in essence, that's almost like the herald call of the spectacle is humiliation, is domination. It gets Orwellian, it gets Big Brother-esque here, where it's like, yeah, to be part of the spectacle, you're either the face getting stamped on, or you're the boot doing the stamping on the face. But regardless, it's a boot on the face forever. And it only exists on those dichotomies because that's the plebeian age, right? It's a boot marching on the image of the memory of the real human being's identity. So it is all violence, and it will lead to more violence, just like it has for all of history. So we got this far, and this is where I said, I knew for once in approaching this video that I knew how it would begin and I knew how it would end. And that was sections 1, or aphorisms 1 through 18 on Guy Debord's The Society of the Spectacle. But basically, when he writes that all of social reality has become this force, and this force is social reality, then I could point out and say, well, what is the name? What is the trait of this dominant social force? And this is where Nietzsche named that trait and that answer by saying, the last man liveth longest, right? From top to bottom, Leviathan, the spectacle, it's last man all the way down, right? There's a lot of imitation. There's a lot of image and representation. There's people playing their roles. There's some people, most people are just doing their job, and a few people really identify with whatever role they're doing in life, whether that matches their personality type or not. All of nature's social organizations have their natural formations. I wouldn't call a stalemate of the plebeian age of Leviathan, right? The last man, the one herd and no shepherd. I would call that a stalemate. I wouldn't call that a goal or a purpose or a future. So where I'm ending this is the same place I began it, which is to say, the spectacle, modern life, life in the foreseeable future until whatever happens next, which isn't supposed to happen, right? Because history technically can't happen when nobody wants to see, right? What Debord was talking about, everything that actually is revealing itself right now that doesn't want to be seen, it'll eventually be seen. And then it'll be presented so it can be set aside and forever dismissed. But perfected denial of man has taken charge of the totality of human existence. The last man liveth longest. Thanks for checking out the channel. I'll catch you in the next one, maybe.